Step out of the car. Now. The command cut through the rain like it had been waiting for her, sharp, rehearsed, and already certain of how this would end. Red and blue lights pulsed across the wet pavement, reflecting off the black hood of the sedan in fractured streaks, turning the quiet residential street into something colder, something staged. Naomi Carter sat still for half a second longer than expected, not out of hesitation, but observation, her eyes lifting to the rearview mirror where the patrol car's headlights burned white and impatient, then to the second cruiser angled ahead of her, sealing the street like a deliberate choice rather than routine procedure. The engine hummed low beneath her hands, the dashboard clock blinking 10:42 p.m., and for a brief moment, the only sound inside the car was her own breath, slow and measured, as if she were counting something invisible. Outside, Officer Travis Doyle approached with the kind of stride that suggested ownership, one hand hovering near his belt, not rushed, not cautious, just certain, as if the outcome had already been decided before he ever stepped out of his vehicle. The rain had softened to a fine mist, clinging to the fabric of his uniform, catching in the beam of the streetlight above, but he didn't seem to notice it, didn't seem to notice anything except the woman behind the wheel. Naomi reached for the door handle and stepped out, heels touching wet asphalt with a quiet, controlled precision, her coat falling neatly around her frame, her posture straight, composed, not defensive, not apologetic. She didn't ask why she had been stopped, not yet. She didn't fill the silence he clearly expected her to break. Instead, she looked at him, not confrontational, just present, just aware, taking in the badge, the name stitched above the pocket, the slight tightening of his jaw when she didn't immediately comply with the unspoken script. Another officer, younger, Officer Ethan Brooks, circled toward the passenger side, his body cam angled slightly higher than necessary, the small red light blinking like a witness that had already chosen a side. A convenience store across the street cast a sterile white glow over the scene, illuminating the edges of everything, the curb, the raindrops, the faint steam rising from a storm drain, and a couple standing just inside the glass door, watching without stepping outside, there. Silhouettes blurred by condensation and distance. License and registration, Travis said, his tone flat, practiced, not aggressive, but not neutral either, something in between that carried its own kind of pressure. Naomi nodded once, slow, deliberate, turning back toward the open car door, retrieving her wallet and the folded documents from the center console, her movements controlled, visible, intentional, as if she understood exactly how every gesture might be interpreted. She handed them over without a word. Travis took them, glanced down briefly, then back up at her, his eyes narrowing just enough to suggest something didn't align with whatever expectation he had formed the moment he saw her car. "You know why I stopped you tonight?" he asked, but the question didn't feel like a question. Naomi met his gaze evenly. "No, officer," she replied, her voice calm, steady, neither defensive nor dismissive, just factual. For a moment, something flickered across his expression, not doubt, not yet, but a subtle shift, like a script encountering resistance it hadn't anticipated. Behind him, Ethan leaned slightly closer to the passenger window, peering inside, scanning the interior with quick, searching glances, as if the answers might be hidden in plain sight. The rain continued its quiet descent, tapping softly against the car roof, against the pavement, against the silence stretching between them. Travis exhaled slowly, then gestured toward the back of the vehicle. "We're going to take a look in the car," he said, already moving as if permission had been granted. Naomi didn't step back. She didn't step forward either. She simply stood where she was, the faint scent of rain and asphalt rising around her, her hands relaxed at her sides, her eyes tracking every movement, every glance, every assumption being made without being spoken. In the distance, a car passed slowly, its tires hissing against the wet road, the driver's head turning just slightly as they took in the scene before continuing on. Naomi felt the weight of the moment settle, not heavy, not overwhelming, but precise, like a line being drawn that she had seen before, that she had studied, that she understood in ways these officers did not. She glanced once more at the flashing lights reflecting off the windshield, then back at Travis, her voice quiet, almost measured against the rhythm of the rain. "Officer," she said, not raising her tone, not challenging, just placing the word carefully into the space between them. I need you to think very carefully about what happens next. For a fraction of a second, the night seemed to hold its breath, the lights still pulsing, the rain still falling, the city still moving just beyond the edge of the scene. But something, subtle and unspoken, had already begun to shift. Travis did not answer her warning, not directly, but something in his posture shifted, a tightening around the shoulders, a subtle recalibration that lasted less than a second before it hardened again into authority, the kind that does not like to be questioned in public. He let out a short breath through his nose and glanced briefly at Ethan, a silent exchange passing between them that required no words, only habit. "Step back from the vehicle," Travis said, his tone firmer now, less conversational, more procedural, as if the previous moment had not happened at all. Naomi did not argue. She took one measured step back, heels clicking softly against the damp pavement, the sound small but precise in the quiet stretch of street. The flashing lights painted her face in alternating color, red then blue then red again, and for a brief instant, her reflection caught in the side mirror of her own car, layered over the glare of the patrol lights behind her, a double image that felt almost symbolic without needing to be named. Ethan moved closer to the passenger side, opening the door with a quick motion, his eyes scanning the interior with practiced efficiency, though his movements carried a hint of something less practiced, something more eager, as if he were searching for confirmation rather than truth. He leaned in, checking the glove compartment, the center console, the floorboard, each movement accompanied by the faint rustle of fabric and plastic, the small sounds amplified by the stillness around them. Across the street, the convenience store door opened briefly, a bell chiming as someone stepped out, paused, then stopped entirely, drawn into the scene without meaning to be part of it. Naomi felt the weight of those distant eyes, not heavy, not intrusive, just present, another layer in a moment that was quietly expanding beyond the three people directly involved. Travis circled toward the back of the car, his shoes making soft contact with the wet asphalt, his hand brushing lightly against the trunk as if claiming it, then stopping near the rear bumper, turning back toward Naomi. "You have anything in the vehicle we need to know about?" he asked, the question framed as routine but delivered with an expectation already built into it. Naomi shook her head once, slow and steady. "No, sir," she said, her voice even, her tone controlled, not submissive, not defiant, simply clear. Travis watched her for a moment longer than necessary, his gaze searching for something unsaid, something out of place, but finding only composure. He turned away again, nodding slightly toward Ethan. "Pop the trunk," he called out, though he was already reaching for the release himself, as if the command was more for effect than necessity. The trunk opened with a soft mechanical click, revealing a neatly organized space, a small overnight bag, a folder tucked to one side, nothing that matched the tension being built around it. Ethan stepped around to join him, peering inside, shifting items slightly, his movements careful enough to appear methodical, but not careful enough to suggest restraint. Naomi watched them both, her eyes moving from one to the other, not tracking every motion, but absorbing the pattern, the rhythm, the assumptions layered into each decision they made. The rain continued its quiet descent, catching in her hair, dotting the shoulders of her coat, the droplets sliding down in thin lines that disappeared into the fabric. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then fell silent again, the sound swallowed by distance. Travis straightened up from the trunk, his expression unchanged, but there was a faint crease now between his brows, something small, almost imperceptible, like a question he had not yet formed. He closed the trunk with a firm push, the sound echoing softly against the nearby houses, then turned back toward Naomi, stepping closer than before, closing the space between them by a few inches, enough to assert presence without crossing into anything overt. "Go ahead and turn around for me," he said, his voice low, controlled, leaving no room for interpretation. The words hung in the air for a fraction of a second, suspended between instruction and escalation. Naomi did not move immediately, not out of resistance, but out of recognition. This was the point where routine ended and choice began. She looked at him, really looked at him this time, not at the badge, not at the uniform, but at the man behind it, at the certainty in his eyes, the quiet confidence that came from never having his authority meaningfully challenged in a moment like this. Then she turned, slowly, deliberately, her hands remaining visible, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing steady, as if she were stepping into something she had already anticipated. The cold air brushed against the back of her neck as she faced away from them, the flashing lights now casting her shadow forward onto the wet pavement, elongated, shifting with each pulse of color. Behind her, she could hear the subtle movement of fabric, the soft click of equipment being adjusted, the faint murmur of the radio at Travis's shoulder, a stream of coded language that reduced moments like this into numbers and categories. She felt the brief, impersonal touch at her wrist as Travis reached for it. Not rough, not gentle, just efficient, practiced, the kind of contact that carried no acknowledgement of the person it was applied to. Metal met skin, cool and firm, closing around her wrist with a quiet finality that seemed louder than it was. The second cuff followed just as quickly, the motion smooth, controlled, the sequence completed in seconds. Naomi did not flinch. She did not pull away. She did not speak. She simply stood there, her hands now secured behind her, her posture unchanged, her gaze fixed ahead on the empty stretch of street illuminated by the glow of distant streetlights. Across the way, the person who had stepped out of the store shifted their weight, uncertain, watching, their phone half raised but not fully committed. Ethan stepped back slightly, exhaling as if the act itself had resolved something for him, while Travis adjusted his stance, his presence settling into a new configuration now that the situation had been physically defined. For a moment, everything seemed to align with their expectations, the scene fitting neatly into the pattern they knew, the outcome predictable, contained. But Naomi remained still, her voice absent, her reaction withheld, and in that silence, something else began to take shape, something that did not match the script they were used to following. The street did not change, not immediately, but the meaning of it did, settling into a quiet tension that no longer came from movement but from stillness, from the way Naomi Carter stood with her hands secured behind her back, shoulders squared, chin level, as if the restraint had not altered her center of gravity at all. The rain had eased further now, reduced to a faint mist that clung to the air rather than falling through it, and the flashing lights continued their steady rhythm, washing over her silhouette in alternating color, turning her shadow into something that stretched and recoiled across the pavement with each pulse. Travis Doyle stepped slightly to her side, adjusting his grip on the situation rather than on her, his posture firm, his presence deliberate, the kind of stance that suggested control without needing to reinforce it. He glanced toward Ethan, who had moved back near the open passenger door, still scanning the interior with a kind of restless attention, as if he expected something to reveal itself if he just looked long enough. "Run her name," Travis said, not raising his voice, but projecting it just enough to carry, the words slipping easily into the flow of procedure. Ethan nodded, already reaching for his radio, his thumb pressing the button with practiced familiarity. "Dispatch, this is Unit 24. I need a check on a Naomi Carter, date of birth." His voice trailed slightly as he looked toward Naomi, waiting for confirmation. She did not turn her head. She did not fill in the silence for him. Instead, she stood exactly where she was, eyes forward, breathing steady, letting the gap exist. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then read the information from the identification Travis still held in his hand, his tone flattening into the neutral cadence of someone relaying data rather than engaging with a person. Across the street, the figure near the convenience store had finally committed to watching, phone now fully raised, the small screen glowing faintly in the dim light, capturing a version of the scene that would flatten its complexity into a few seconds of video, a narrative that would travel faster than context ever could. Naomi was aware of it, not distracted by it, but aware, the way one becomes aware of a second layer of reality unfolding alongside the first. Travis shifted his weight, glancing down at the identification again, then back at her, something in his expression tightening, not suspicion exactly, but irritation at the lack of reaction he expected to provoke. "You are very calm for someone in this situation," he said, the observation slipping out before he could frame it as anything else. Naomi did not respond immediately. The question behind his statement hung there, unspoken but clear. Why are you not reacting the way you should? Why are you not matching the script? When she did speak, her voice was low, even, almost quiet enough to be mistaken for something softer than it was. I understand the situation, she said, choosing each word with care, not offering more than necessary, not retreating into silence either. Travis watched her for a moment longer, as if trying to reconcile that answer with what he believed he was seeing. The radio crackled in Ethan's hand, a burst of static followed by the dispatcher's voice, calm, detached, reading back information in the same steady tone used for every name, every check, every routine moment that might or might not be routine. Unit 24, be advised, record found, stand by. The words seemed to stretch the air thinner, not because of what they said, but because of what they promised. Ethan shifted slightly, adjusting his stance, his eyes flicking briefly toward Travis, then back to Naomi, as if trying to anticipate the direction the moment would take. Naomi felt the metal at her wrists, cool against her skin, not painful, not pressing, just present, a constant reminder of the physical reality layered over everything else. She flexed her fingers once, a small, controlled movement, testing nothing, simply acknowledging sensation. The streetlight above flickered faintly, then steadied, casting a pale glow over the scene that softened the edges of everything without changing its clarity. Travis took a slow breath, his chest rising and falling beneath the weight of the uniform, his gaze returning to Naomi with renewed focus, as if the next few seconds would confirm something he had already decided. You live around here? He asked, the question casual on the surface, but edged with something else, something that implied a boundary she had crossed simply by being present. Naomi's eyes remained forward. I am exactly where I need to be, she replied, her tone unchanged, the answer precise without being defensive, a statement that did not fit neatly into the categories he was trying to apply. Ethan's radio crackled again, louder this time, the dispatcher returning with more detail, the voice cutting through the space between them. Unit 24, subject. Naomi Carter, status. The word paused, just long enough to draw attention, just long enough to shift the rhythm of the moment. Travis turned his head slightly toward Ethan, his focus splitting for the first time since the stop began, his certainty encountering something that required confirmation rather than assumption. Naomi stood in that pause, in that narrow space between what they believed and what was about to be clarified, her posture unchanged, her expression steady, her silence no longer empty, but intentional, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment to arrive, not with anticipation, but with readiness. The dispatcher's voice did not rush, did not dramatize, did not adjust its tone to match the tension unfolding under the flashing lights. It simply continued, steady and precise, as if reading from a line that carried no emotion at all. Unit 24, subject Naomi Carter, status confirmed, active personnel, stand by for additional details. And in that moment the air seemed to thin, not visibly, not dramatically, but in a way that shifted the weight of everything that had just happened. Ethan's fingers tightened slightly around the radio, his eyes flicking toward Travis, searching, not for instruction, but for interpretation, for a way to fit this information into the framework he had already committed to. Travis did not move at first, his posture still set in the same confident alignment. But something behind his eyes recalculated, a subtle flicker of recognition colliding with resistance, as if the word active did not yet carry enough meaning to disrupt what he believed he was dealing with. Confirm agency, Travis said after a brief pause, his voice lower now, less performative, more controlled, the command directed toward the radio rather than the woman in front of him, as if clarity could still be managed within procedure. The response came back almost immediately, the dispatcher's voice unchanged, standby, retrieving departmental assignment, followed by a soft click and a stretch of static that filled the space like a held breath. Naomi remained still, her gaze fixed ahead, but her awareness sharpened, not outwardly, not in any way that could be seen, but internally, like a shift in focus rather than position. The metal at her wrists felt the same, the cool pressure unchanged, but its meaning had begun to evolve, no longer just a physical restraint, but a marker of something else, something that would soon be examined from a different angle. Across the street, The person recording adjusted their stance, stepping slightly closer to the curb, drawn in by the subtle change in energy that did not yet have a visible cause. The store's fluorescent lights flickered briefly, then steadied again, casting a pale, unwavering glow across the wet pavement. Ethan cleared his throat, a small, involuntary sound that broke the silence just enough to reveal its presence. "Maybe it is a different Naomi Carter," he said quietly, not fully committing to the suggestion, but offering it as a possibility, a way to maintain the structure of the moment without fully abandoning it. Travis did not respond immediately. He kept his eyes on Naomi, studying her now with a different kind of attention, not the quick assessment of a routine stop, but something slower, more deliberate, as if he were trying to reconcile two versions of reality that did not easily align. Naomi did not return the look. She did not turn her head, did not offer clarification, did not rush to correct or reveal. Instead, she allowed the silence to expand, to settle around them, to do the work that words would have rushed. The radio crackled again, sharper this time, the dispatcher returning with the next line, the one that would not fit neatly into any assumption that had been made. Unit 24, subject Naomi Carter assigned to City Police Department, command level designation, effective immediately. The words hung there, incomplete, but already heavy, already reshaping the space between them. Ethan's posture shifted again, his shoulders tightening, his gaze dropping briefly to the ground before lifting back toward Naomi with something new in it, something that looked like uncertainty but felt closer to realization. Travis exhaled slowly, the sound controlled, but deeper than before, his jaw setting as he processed the information, not rejecting it, but not fully accepting it either, caught in that narrow space where authority meets contradiction. Command level, he repeated under his breath, as if the phrase itself needed to be tested before it could be believed. Naomi finally moved her head, just slightly, enough to angle her gaze toward the side without fully turning, her voice calm when it came, not raised, not emphasized, but placed carefully into the moment like a final piece of a structure that had been building all along. "You should listen to the rest," she said, her tone even, almost quiet, but carrying clearly in the space between them. Travis's eyes shifted toward Ethan's radio, the source of the voice that was about to complete the sentence he was not yet ready to hear. The rain had nearly stopped now, leaving only the faint scent of wet asphalt and the soft hum of distant traffic beyond the edge of the scene. The flashing lights continued their steady rhythm, but they no longer felt like control. They felt like exposure, like illumination revealing more than intended. The dispatcher's voice returned, steady as ever, finishing the line without hesitation, without awareness of the impact it would carry. Unit 24, subject Naomi Carter appointed as incoming precinct captain, reporting at 0800 hours tomorrow morning. The words landed without force, but they settled with precision, reshaping the moment completely, turning what had been routine into something else entirely, something that could not be undone by tone or posture or assumption. Ethan's grip on the radio loosened slightly, his breath catching for just a fraction of a second before he steadied it, his eyes now fixed on Naomi with a clarity that had not been there before. Travis remained still, but the certainty that had defined him at the start of the stop had begun to fracture, not visibly, not dramatically, but in the smallest ways, in the tightening of his jaw, in the shift of his stance, in the way his gaze no longer held the same unquestioned authority. Naomi stood in the center of it all, her hands still secured behind her, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, not triumphant, not reactive, simply undeniable, as the reality of who she was settled into the space they had created without ever asking who she might be. For a moment, no one spoke, not because they did not know what to say, but because every word they had prepared no longer fit the reality standing in front of them. The flashing lights continued to pulse across the wet pavement, but their rhythm felt different now, less like control, more like exposure, illuminating details that had been overlooked just minutes ago. Travis Doyle's grip on the situation loosened in a way that was almost invisible, a fraction of a shift in his stance, a slight hesitation in the way he held himself, but it was there, undeniable to anyone paying close enough attention. He looked at Naomi Carter again, really looked this time, not at her clothes, Not at her car, not at the assumptions he had made when he first stepped out of his cruiser, but at her presence, at the way she stood without tension, without apology, without any trace of the reaction he had expected from the beginning. The word captain seemed to settle in his mind with weight, not as a title alone, but as a correction, a quiet undoing of everything that had led them to this moment. Ethan Brooks shifted beside the open passenger door, his movements no longer searching, no longer confident, his hands hovering uncertainly, as if unsure where to place them now that the script had changed. The radio in his hand remained still, the last transmission echoing faintly in his memory, replaying itself whether he wanted it to or not. Across the street, the person holding the phone lowered it slightly, not because the moment had ended, but because it had transformed into something harder to define, something that no longer fit neatly into the frame they had been capturing. Naomi did not turn immediately. She remained facing forward, her eyes fixed on the quiet stretch of road ahead, the distant glow of streetlights reflecting off the damp asphalt, her breathing steady, her posture unchanged. The metal at her wrists felt colder now, not physically, but symbolically, a reminder not just of what had been done, but of how quickly assumptions had become action. Travis took a slow step closer, then stopped, as if reconsidering the distance between them for the first time. His voice, when it came, was quieter, stripped of the earlier edge, but not yet settled into anything resembling certainty. "Ma'am," he began, the word catching slightly, as if it had to push through something before it could be spoken. He stopped there, the rest of the sentence refusing to form in the same way it might have just minutes ago. Naomi tilted her head just enough to acknowledge him without fully turning, her voice calm when she responded, measured against the silence that surrounded them. "You can finish that sentence when you know what you are about to say," she said, not sharp, not dismissive, but precise, placing the responsibility back where it belonged. Ethan looked down briefly, his jaw tightening, the realization settling in not as a sudden shock, but as a slow, undeniable shift, like a structure adjusting under new weight. Travis exhaled again, longer this time, the sound carrying with it the first trace of something unfamiliar, something closer to uncertainty than authority. He glanced at Naomi's wrists, at the restraint that now felt out of place, then back at her face, searching for a cue he had not needed before. "We are going to," he started, then stopped again, the sentence unraveling before it could take shape. Naomi finally turned her head, slowly, deliberately, her eyes meeting his for the first time since the dispatcher's words had reshaped the moment. There was no anger there, no visible frustration, only clarity, the kind that did not need to be raised or emphasized to be understood. "You are going to follow your procedure," she said quietly, each word steady, grounded, leaving no room for interpretation. "And then you are going to explain why it was not followed earlier." The statement did not land as a threat. It landed as fact. Travis nodded once, a small, controlled movement, but one that carried more weight than any command he had given before. He stepped behind her, his movements slower now, more deliberate, the routine he had performed countless times taking on a different meaning under the weight of what he now knew. The click of the mechanism releasing was softer than it had been when it closed, the metal loosening around her wrists with a quiet finality that echoed in the stillness. Naomi brought her hands forward, not rubbing them, not reacting to the release, simply letting them rest at her sides again, her posture returning to what it had been before, unchanged, uninterrupted. Ethan stepped back further, creating space without being told, his eyes shifting between Naomi and Travis, recalibrating his understanding of both. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the air cool and still, the faint scent of wet pavement lingering as the only trace of what had been falling just moments ago. Naomi adjusted the sleeve of her coat with a small, precise motion, then looked at both officers, her gaze steady, not lingering, not avoiding. "This is the part where most people start explaining," she said, her tone even, almost conversational, but anchored in something deeper. "You can take your time. I am listening." No one moved immediately. The street remained quiet, the lights still flashing, the night unchanged in every way except the one that mattered most, the one that had shifted silently, decisively, the moment truth replaced assumption and authority met accountability. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, like weight moving from one side of a room to the other, subtle but undeniable, and Travis Doyle felt it before he could name it, a pressure behind his ribs that had nothing to do with the cold air and everything to do with the words he had not yet said. He looked at Naomi Carter, then at the ground just in front of her shoes, then back again, as if searching for the exact place to begin, but finding none that felt sufficient. The street remained still, the flashing lights now less urgent, more mechanical, continuing their cycle without regard for what had changed between the people standing beneath them. Ethan Brooks adjusted his stance again, his hands finally settling at his sides, no longer reaching, no longer searching, his earlier confidence replaced by a kind of alert stillness, like someone who has just realized he is part of something larger than he understood a moment ago. Travis cleared his throat, the sound small but sharp in the quiet, and when he spoke, his voice carried less certainty, more intention, each word placed carefully, as if he were stepping across ground that might not hold if he moved too quickly. "We initiated the stop based on a vehicle match," he said, keeping his tone even, procedural, but the edges of it had softened, the authority no longer assumed, but measured. "There was a report of a similar vehicle in the area connected to a possible incident." He paused briefly, not for effect, but because the next part required something he was not used to giving. "We did not confirm that match before escalating." The admission hung there, simple, unembellished, but heavier than any justification could have been. Naomi listened without interrupting, her posture unchanged, her eyes steady on him, not pressing, not forgiving, simply present. The air carried a faint chill now that the rain had stopped completely, and somewhere in the distance, a car door closed, the sound echoing faintly before fading into the background. Travis continued, his voice quieter now, but clearer. "We moved too quickly," he said, the words landing more directly, less shielded by procedure. "And we did not take the time to verify before acting." Ethan glanced at him, then back at Naomi, his expression tightening slightly, not in disagreement, but in recognition, as if hearing the truth spoken aloud forced him to confront his own role in it. Naomi shifted her weight just slightly, not stepping forward, not stepping back, but grounding herself more firmly in the space, her presence steady, her attention unwavering. "You assumed," she said, her tone calm, not accusatory, but precise, cutting through the explanation to its core. Travis nodded once, the motion small but deliberate. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, the word coming more naturally now, not as a correction, but as an acknowledgement. Naomi let a brief silence follow, not to create discomfort, but to allow the weight of that acknowledgement to settle fully. The person across the street had stopped recording entirely now, their phone lowered, their posture relaxed slightly, as if the moment had shifted from spectacle to something more personal, something less easily consumed. Naomi looked from Travis to Ethan, her gaze steady on both, including them equally in what came next. "Do you know what assumption looks like from this side?" she asked, not raising her voice, not changing her tone, but placing the question carefully, intentionally. Neither man answered immediately. The question did not invite a quick response. It required reflection, something that did not fit easily into the rhythm they were used to. Naomi did not wait for an answer. "It looks like being treated as a possibility instead of a person," she continued, her voice even, measured, each word carrying more weight than its volume suggested. "It looks like a decision being made before a question is asked." The flashing lights continued to pulse, but now they felt distant, secondary, the real focus centered in the space between the three of them. Travis held her gaze, not defensively, not challengingly, but steadily, absorbing what she was saying without interruption. Ethan shifted slightly again, his eyes dropping briefly before returning to Naomi, the meaning of her words settling in gradually, not as a single realization, but as a series of small adjustments to everything he thought he understood about the moment. Naomi let another brief pause settle, then spoke again, her tone unchanged, but the direction of it shifting slightly. "What matters now is not that you made a mistake," she said, her voice calm, grounded. "It is what you do after you recognize it." Travis exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction, not disappearing, but changing form, becoming something closer to focus than defensiveness. "We document everything," he said, more certain now. not because the situation was easy, but because the path forward was clear. We report the stop, the escalation, and the error in judgment. Naomi nodded once, a small, controlled motion, acknowledging the answer without softening its implications. And you review it, she added, her voice steady. Not just for compliance, but for pattern. The word lingered, heavier than the rest, pointing to something beyond the moment, something systemic, something that extended past this street, this night, this single interaction. Ethan inhaled quietly, the realization deepening, his posture straightening slightly, not in defense, but in awareness. Travis met Naomi's gaze again, and this time, there was no attempt to reclaim authority in it, only a recognition of it, a shift from control to accountability that had not been there before. The street remained quiet, the night unchanged in its physical form, but altered in meaning, the moment no longer defined by what had happened, but by what had been understood and what would follow because of it. The word pattern did not disappear after she said it. It lingered, settling into the space between them with a quiet weight that neither Travis nor Ethan could ignore, not because it was loud, but because it was accurate, and accuracy had a way of staying longer than anything else. Travis Doyle nodded again, slower this time, as if the motion itself required more intention than before, his mind already moving through the implications of what had just been laid out, not only the report he would file, but the record it would become, the questions it might raise, the conversations that would follow. He shifted his stance slightly, no longer positioning himself as the center of the scene, but as part of it, a subtle change that would have gone unnoticed earlier, but now carried meaning. Understood, he said, his voice steady, but quieter, less about asserting, more about acknowledging. Ethan Brooks remained still for a moment longer, then stepped forward just enough to close the distance he had unconsciously created, his eyes meeting Naomi Carter's with a clarity that had not been there when the stop began. We should not have moved to restraints that quickly, he said, the admission coming more directly from him than anything he had said so far, his tone measured, not defensive, but reflective. Naomi listened, her expression unchanged, not offering reassurance, not withholding it either, simply allowing the statement to exist on its own. The streetlight above cast a soft, steady glow now, no longer competing with the rain, illuminating the scene with a clarity that felt almost deliberate, as if the environment itself had settled into a quieter truth. Naomi turned slightly toward her car, her gaze moving briefly over the open passenger door, the disturbed contents inside, then back to the officers, her attention returning to the present with the same calm precision she had carried from the start. "Close the vehicle," she said, her tone even, not a command in volume, but an expectation, a small restoration of order that signaled the shift in control without needing to declare it. Ethan nodded immediately, moving to the passenger side, his actions now careful, deliberate, placing items back where they had been, closing the compartment, then the door, each motion carried out with an awareness that had not been present before. The soft click of the door shutting felt different this time, not part of a search, but part of a reset. Travis remained where he was, his attention still on Naomi, his posture no longer rigid, but aligned, as if he were standing in front of someone whose authority he now recognized rather than assumed over. Naomi took a slow breath, the air cool against her lungs, then spoke again, her voice steady, grounded. "What happened here tonight is not unusual," she said, not raising her voice, not emphasizing the statement, but letting it land with quiet clarity. "That is the problem." The words did not accuse, they revealed, and in that distinction, they carried more weight. Travis's jaw tightened slightly, not in resistance, but in recognition, the truth of it settling in without needing to be argued. Ethan glanced down briefly, then back up, the realization deepening, not as a sudden shift, but as a steady adjustment to something he had not fully examined before. Naomi continued, her tone unchanged, her words measured. "You followed a pattern you have seen work before," she said. "You trusted it more than you trusted the moment in front of you." The flashing lights from the patrol cars continued to cycle, but their presence felt almost distant now, like background noise to something more significant unfolding in the center of the scene. Travis exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just a fraction, the weight of the moment no longer something to push against, but something to carry forward. Then we changed the pattern, he said, the words simple, but intentional, not offered as a solution that erased what had happened, but as a direction that acknowledged it. Naomi met his gaze, holding it for a brief moment, assessing not just the words, but the way they were said, the steadiness behind them, the absence of deflection. She gave a small nod, not approving, not dismissing, simply recognizing the statement for what it was. You start by seeing it, she replied, her voice calm. Then you interrupt it. Ethan straightened slightly, the meaning of that settling in, not as instruction alone, but as responsibility. Across the street, the observer who had been watching the entire time turned away, slipping back into the store, the moment no longer something to capture, but something that had already left its mark. Naomi glanced once more at the officers, then at the quiet street around them, the night returning to its ordinary rhythm, cars passing in the distance, lights glowing in windows, the city continuing without pause. We are done here, she said, her tone even, final without being abrupt. Travis nodded, stepping back slightly, creating space where there had once been control. Ethan moved toward the patrol car, his actions steady, purposeful, no longer driven by assumption, but by awareness. Naomi turned toward her vehicle, her movements calm, unhurried, reclaiming the space that had been taken from her without resistance, without urgency, simply by being present in it again. The street remained the same, the lights still flashing, the air still cool, but something within it had shifted, quietly, permanently, not in spectacle, but in understanding, the kind that does not announce itself, but changes everything that follows. Naomi Carter did not rush back into her car, even though the door was now closed and the interior had been restored to its original order, because leaving too quickly would have turned the moment into something smaller than it was, something forgettable, and she understood that what had just happened required space, not speed. She stood beside the driver's side door, her hand resting lightly near the handle, not gripping it, not reaching for it, just acknowledging its presence while her attention remained on the two officers a few feet away. The flashing lights from the patrol cars still painted the street in alternating color, but their intensity felt diminished now, no longer the center of the scene, more like an echo of what had already passed. Travis Doyle moved toward his cruiser slowly, not retreating, not avoiding, but repositioning himself within the situation, his steps measured, his posture no longer rigid but grounded, as if he were recalibrating how to exist in a space where his authority had been redefined. Ethan Brooks followed, his movements quieter than before, his earlier urgency replaced by a deliberate awareness of each action, each sound, each glance. The radio at his shoulder remained silent now, the channel clear, as if even the dispatcher understood that no further words were needed in this moment. Naomi watched them without staring, her gaze steady, observant, taking in the subtle shifts in their behavior, the way their shoulders had lowered, the way their movements had slowed, the way their presence no longer pressed outward but settled inward. The night air felt cooler against her skin, the absence of rain leaving behind a faint stillness that seemed to hold everything in place for just a little longer than usual. A car passed at the far end of the block, its headlights sweeping briefly across the scene before disappearing, the driver unaware of the quiet transformation that had just taken place. Travis reached his cruiser and paused beside the open door, his hand resting on the edge of it, not entering yet, not turning away completely, as if he understood that leaving without closing the moment would leave something unresolved. He glanced back at Naomi, then at Ethan, then down at the pavement, the sequence of movements small but intentional, a reflection of someone processing rather than reacting. Naomi took a step closer to her car, her shoes making a soft sound against the damp asphalt, then stopped again, her hand finally touching the door handle, not opening it, just holding it lightly. She turned her head toward Travis, her voice calm when she spoke, carrying easily across the short distance between them. Tomorrow morning, she said, her tone even, we will not start from this moment. Travis looked at her, his brow tightening slightly, not in confusion, but in concentration, trying to understand the direction of her words. Naomi continued, her voice steady, her posture unchanged. We will start from what you do after it. The statement settled between them with quiet clarity, reframing the entire situation not as an ending, but as a beginning, not of her authority, but of their response to it. Ethan shifted slightly, his attention sharpening again, the meaning of her words landing in layers, each one adding to the understanding that this was not simply about a mistake, but about what followed it. Travis nodded slowly, the motion deliberate, not automatic, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer than before. "Understood," he said, the word carrying more weight now, not as a routine acknowledgement, but as a commitment he had not expected to make when the night began. Naomi released the door handle, letting her hand fall back to her side, her decision to remain outside for a few seconds longer feeling intentional rather than hesitant. She looked at both officers one more time, her gaze steady, not lingering, not dismissing, simply present. "Drive safe," she added, her tone neutral, the phrase simple, but carrying a different meaning in this context, not just a courtesy, but a reminder, one that extended beyond the physical act of driving. Travis inclined his head slightly, a small gesture of acknowledgement that felt more genuine than anything he had said earlier. Ethan mirrored the motion, quieter, but equally intentional. Naomi opened her car door then, the hinge moving smoothly, the interior light coming on softly, casting a warm contrast against the cool tones of the street. She paused for a fraction of a second before getting in, her eyes briefly scanning the road ahead, the path clear, uninterrupted, waiting. Then she slid into the driver's seat, closing the door with a controlled motion that sealed the space around her, the outside noise dimming instantly. The engine started with a low, steady hum, the dashboard lighting up in a familiar glow, everything inside returning to normal as if nothing had happened, and yet everything had. Outside, Travis and Ethan stood beside their cruiser, watching for just a moment longer, not out of suspicion, but out of recognition, the kind that lingers even after a moment has passed. Naomi pulled away from the curb slowly, the car moving forward with quiet confidence, merging back into the empty stretch of road, the red and blue lights fading behind her in the rearview mirror, growing smaller with each second until they became just another part of the night. The street returned to stillness, the air cool, the lights steady, the city continuing as it always did, but within that ordinary rhythm, something had shifted, not loudly, not visibly, but deeply, the kind of shift that does not announce itself, but changes the direction of everything that comes after. The road stretched ahead of Naomi Carter in a quiet line of asphalt and dim streetlights, each one passing over the windshield in steady intervals, casting brief shadows across her hands on the steering wheel before fading behind her. And for the first time since the stop, the silence inside the car belonged entirely to her. The engine hummed low and consistent, the tires gliding over the slightly damp pavement, and the city at this hour felt different, not asleep, not awake, but suspended somewhere in between, where everything moved slower and nothing demanded immediate attention. She kept her eyes forward, posture unchanged, her breathing even, but her mind did not drift. It sharpened, replaying the sequence not as emotion, but as information, each detail filing itself into place with quiet precision. The initial approach, the tone, the lack of verification, the escalation, the assumption, the restraint, the shift, the acknowledgement, all of it forming a pattern she had studied before in reports and briefings, but now experienced firsthand, not abstract, not distant, but immediate. She adjusted her grip on the wheel slightly, not out of tension, but to ground herself in the present, the leather smooth beneath her fingers, familiar, controlled. A traffic light ahead turned yellow, then red, and she slowed to a stop, the car settling gently as the brake engaged, the intersection empty except for a single vehicle waiting on the opposite side. The red glow reflected faintly on the hood, steady, unwavering, and for a moment, everything held still again. Naomi glanced briefly at the rearview mirror, the distant flicker of patrol lights now barely visible, reduced to a faint pulse far behind her, no longer part of her immediate reality, but not entirely gone either. She turned her gaze back forward, her expression calm, but her focus deeper now, more deliberate. This was not about one stop. It never was. The light changed to green, and she moved forward again, the car responding smoothly, merging into the empty stretch of road with quiet confidence. A few blocks later, she passed a row of closed storefronts, their windows dark except for the occasional security light, each reflection sliding across her windshield and disappearing just as quickly. The city was still here, still functioning, still layered with routines and systems that most people never questioned, and that was exactly where the problem lived, in what was considered normal. Naomi exhaled slowly, her breath controlled, not heavy, not strained, just measured, as if releasing something that had been held not in her body, but in her awareness. She reached toward the center console and picked up the envelope that had shifted slightly during the search, the official seal still intact, though the edge was now faintly creased. She rested it on her lap for a moment, her fingers brushing lightly over the surface, not opening it, not needing to, because she already knew what it contained. Tomorrow at 0800 hours, that paper would become a position, a responsibility, a structure she would step into fully, but tonight had already given her something else, something the document could not. She placed the envelope back beside her, her attention returning to the road, her mind already moving ahead, not in speculation, but in preparation. She thought about Travis Doyle, about the moment his certainty had shifted, not shattered, but adjusted, and about Ethan Brooks, whose realization had come slower, but settled deeper. She thought about how many times this exact pattern had played out without interruption, without correction, without anyone standing in the space long enough to change it. The car moved through another intersection, the light green, the road clear, the city opening up slightly as she approached a wider avenue lined with taller buildings, their upper floors still lit in places, silent evidence of lives continuing beyond what could be seen from the street. Naomi felt the weight of what came next, not as pressure, but as clarity, the kind that did not overwhelm, but focused. She would walk into that precinct in the morning not as someone who had read the reports, but as someone who had lived the pattern, who had stood inside it and watched it unfold in real time. That difference mattered. It would shape how she spoke, how she listened, how she led. A police cruiser passed in the opposite direction, its headlights steady, no sirens, no urgency, just another unit moving through the night, unaware of the shift that had already begun. Naomi's gaze followed it for a brief second, then returned forward, her hands steady on the wheel, her posture unchanged. The road ahead remained open, the path clear, but no longer neutral. She understood now, with absolute certainty, that change would not come from statements or policies alone. It would come from moments like the one she had just left behind, moments where assumption met reality and had to adjust. The car continued forward, the city unfolding quietly around her, and in that steady motion, Naomi Carter did not feel the need to look back again, because what had happened was already moving with her, not as a memory to revisit, but as a foundation for what she would build next. The city did not greet the morning with noise. It unfolded slowly, light replacing shadow in thin layers across glass and concrete. And by the time Naomi Carter stepped out of her car in the precinct parking lot, the air carried that early stillness that exists just before a building fully wakes. The engine had gone quiet behind her, the faint ticking of cooling metal barely audible as she closed the door with a controlled motion, her hand lingering for a fraction of a second on the handle before releasing it. The building stood ahead, familiar in structure, unfamiliar in meaning, a place she had studied, reviewed, analyzed from a distance, now becoming something immediate, something she would walk into not as an observer, but as the one responsible for everything inside it. The glass doors reflected her for a moment as she approached, the early light catching the outline of her uniform, crisp, deliberate, each detail in place without excess. She did not adjust anything. She did not hesitate. She stepped forward and the doors opened with a soft mechanical glide, the interior air cooler, carrying the faint scent of paper, coffee, and something older, something embedded in the walls from years of routine and repetition. Inside, the front desk officer looked up, his posture shifting almost instantly from casual to alert, recognition not immediate, but forming quickly as her presence registered in the space. "Good morning," he said, his voice respectful, but uncertain, as if trying to place her without fully committing to an assumption. Naomi gave a small nod, her expression calm, her voice even. "Good morning," she replied, not adding more, not needing to. Her steps were steady as she moved past the desk, the sound of her shoes against the polished floor measured and consistent, each one echoing slightly in the quiet hallway beyond. The station was not empty, but it was not yet fully active either. A few officers moving through the space, some carrying files, others holding cups of coffee, their conversations low, unfinished, the rhythm of the morning not yet settled into its usual pace. One by one, they noticed her, not all at once, but in fragments, a glance here, a second look there, recognition forming in pieces before aligning into understanding. The room did not stop. It shifted. Conversations quieted slightly, movements slowed just enough to acknowledge her presence without interrupting their own. Naomi continued forward, her gaze steady, not scanning for approval, not avoiding attention, simply moving through the space with quiet certainty. She passed a bulletin board lined with notices, schedules, reminders, each one representing a system designed to maintain order, and she thought briefly of the difference between structure and culture, how one could exist without the other being right. At the far end of the hallway, a door stood partially open, lights spilling out from within, the room beyond already active. Roll call. The timing was precise. She reached the door and paused for just a fraction of a second, not to gather herself, but to mark the transition, then stepped inside. The room held a dozen officers, some seated, some standing, their attention shifting toward her in a gradual wave, recognition spreading from one to the next, the low hum of conversation fading into silence without being commanded to do so. Travis Doyle was there, near the front, his posture straight, his expression controlled, but the moment his eyes met hers, something deeper registered, not surprise, not discomfort, but awareness, the kind that carried memory within it. Ethan Brooks stood slightly behind him, his stance more measured than it had been the night before, his gaze steady, not avoiding hers, but not seeking it either, as if understanding that acknowledgement did not require repetition. Naomi stepped fully into the room, the light from the windows behind her outlining her presence without exaggeration, and for a moment, no one spoke, not because they did not know what was happening, but because they understood that the moment did not belong to noise. She moved to the front, setting the envelope down on the desk with a soft, deliberate motion, not opening it, not referencing it, simply placing it there as a fact that did not need to be explained. Her hands rested lightly on either side of it, her posture straight, her gaze moving across the room, meeting each set of eyes not individually, but collectively, as if addressing the space rather than the people within it. The silence held for a beat longer, then settled, not heavy, not tense, but focused. Naomi took a slow breath, the air steady in her lungs, and when she spoke, her voice carried without force, clear, grounded, filling the room without needing to rise. "We start with what we carry into this room," she said, her tone even, not introducing herself, not announcing her position, but establishing something deeper, something that did not depend on title alone. The officers remained still, their attention fixed, not because they were instructed to listen, but because something in the way she spoke made it unnecessary to do anything else. Naomi's gaze did not waver. "Last night," she continued, not raising her voice, not changing her pace, "I saw a pattern." The words settled into the room, not as an accusation, but as a statement, one that did not require immediate response, only recognition. Travis's jaw tightened slightly, his eyes remaining forward, his posture unchanged, but the acknowledgement was there, quiet, internal, real. Ethan inhaled slowly, his shoulders steady, his focus sharpened, the memory of the night before aligning with the present in a way that left no space for denial. Naomi let the silence follow, not to create pressure, but to allow the meaning to take shape fully, then continued, her voice steady, precise. "And today," she said, "we decide whether that pattern continues or changes." The room remained still, but something within it shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but fundamentally, the kind of shift that does not announce itself, but redefines everything that comes after it. The room remained silent after Naomi finished speaking, the weight of her words settling in like a shift in the air that no one could escape. It wasn't the kind of silence that demanded answers immediately, but one that invited reflection, an understanding that what had just been laid down was more than a statement. It was a challenge, a call for change, one that required action, not just words. Travis Doyle stood with his hands loosely clasped in front of him, his posture straight, but his gaze no longer holding the same certainty it had earlier. He was still, but in a way that suggested he was recalculating everything he thought he knew about authority, about leadership, about what it meant to hold responsibility. Ethan Brooks, standing beside him, shifted his weight slightly, his body tense but not in the defensive way it had been the night before. There was a softness in his stance now, a subtle shift that revealed the internal shift he had undergone in the past 24 hours. Naomi's gaze moved from one officer to the next, not lingering too long on any single person, but addressing them collectively, as if she were speaking to something deeper than the individuals before her. The room held its breath, the space thick with unspoken thoughts, but Naomi didn't wait for someone else to speak. She continued, her voice steady, unwavering. What happened last night wasn't just about one mistake, one wrong call, she said, letting the words settle between them, her gaze never faltering. It's about the systems that allow that mistake to happen over and over, unnoticed, unquestioned, accepted as normal. Her words weren't sharp, but they were firm, like a quiet force that could not be ignored. If we want to change how things are done here, it starts with understanding how we got here, not just blaming the individual actions. The officers in the room absorbed this quietly, some nodding, others looking down, not in shame, but in quiet recognition of the weight of her message. Naomi took a step back, placing both hands lightly on the table in front of her, leaning just slightly toward them, her posture not threatening, but open, inviting, like someone who understood that true change could not be imposed. It had to be understood and embraced. You all have seen it, probably more times than you care to admit, she continued, her voice still calm but carrying a quiet intensity. The quick assumption that leads to escalation, the lack of pause before jumping to conclusions, the lack of accountability when it happens. She met each of their eyes as she spoke, a steady look that demanded they really hear her. And that has to stop. There was no loud declaration, no forceful reprimand, just the simple fact of the matter spoken plainly. In that moment, something changed in the room. Not an immediate transformation, but a shift in perspective, something that was slow to build but unshakable once it took root. Travis exhaled slowly, his expression thoughtful, no longer standing as the officer in charge, but as a man who understood that his role was not to enforce power, but to guide it. Ethan's shoulders relaxed, the tension easing out of his body as the weight of what Naomi had said settled into him, not as something that had to be immediately fixed, but something that had to be lived. We can't keep doing this, Naomi said quietly, but with enough force to make it clear that there was no other option. Not if we really want to protect the people we serve. The room was still, but not uncomfortable. It was a stillness of recognition, of understanding, not resistance. The officers were not looking for a way out, not looking for someone to blame. They were ready to listen, ready to change, even if they weren't yet fully sure what that change would look like. Travis nodded slowly, once, a subtle movement, but it carried meaning. Understood, he said, his voice steady now, no longer distant, no longer removed. Ethan followed suit, his expression softening. We'll work on it, he said quietly, the words simple but sincere. Naomi looked at both of them, not in judgment, but in quiet recognition of their acknowledgement. That's all I ask, she replied, her tone still calm, still steady. The rest will follow if we're committed to it. She stood there for a moment longer, allowing the weight of the conversation to sit with them. The air in the room felt different now, not as heavy, but as if it had expanded, filled with possibility rather than restriction. It was a shift, small but undeniable, one that no one would be able to ignore as they walked out of this room, carrying it with them, each person now aware of the role they played in the pattern that Naomi had spoken of. She turned toward the door slowly, the movement fluid, unhurried, but decisive. Let's get to work, she said, her voice carrying one last time before the door closed behind her, the sound of it soft but final. Inside the room, the officers stood still for a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of understanding. And in that brief silence, something had shifted, subtle but significant. like the first stirrings of change too long overlooked, now finally recognized and accepted. They would not forget this moment, not soon, not ever, because it had changed something deeper than their routine. It had changed their perception of how they saw themselves and the work they were meant to do. The morning passed with quiet efficiency, the hours slipping by in measured routine as Naomi Carter settled into the rhythm of the precinct, a space now not just hers in position, but in practice. She had met with key personnel, discussed the priorities for the week, addressed ongoing cases, and taken a few quiet moments to herself in her new office, the chair behind the desk now her place, her space, a seat that carried weight not because of the title it held, but because of what she had chosen to bring with her. The hum of the building around her seemed quieter than before, as if even the structure itself recognized the shift, the undercurrent of energy now directed towards something different, something that no one could immediately name, but that everyone would soon feel. At noon, she met with Travis Doyle and Ethan Brooks again, their previous acknowledgement of the challenges ahead now moving from conversation into action, the tone no longer defensive but collaborative, the understanding now that change was not an individual effort, but a collective one. They sat across from each other in a small conference room, the table between them a symbol of the distance they still needed to cross, but one that no longer felt impossible. Naomi looked from one to the other, her expression calm but direct, the weight of the previous day still present, but tempered by the certainty that had been building since the first moment she stepped into this role. "I want to make something clear," she began, her voice steady, not demanding, but firm. "The work we do here is about more than just enforcing the law. It's about maintaining trust, accountability, and making sure that when we walk into a room, the people in that room know that we're there to serve, not to control." Travis nodded slowly, the acknowledgement there, but Naomi could see the hesitation in his eyes, the old patterns still battling against the shift she was trying to establish. "I know it's a difficult transition," Naomi continued, her gaze steady. "But I need you both to understand that when we make mistakes, when we fall short of what we should be, it doesn't just affect the individual. It affects everyone. It erodes the trust that people have in us, and once that trust is gone, it's not easy to get back." There was a quiet moment before Ethan spoke, his voice softer than it had been the day before, less certain, but more reflective. "I understand," he said, meeting her gaze directly. "It's not about just fixing mistakes after they happen. It's about making sure we don't create them in the first place." Naomi nodded, acknowledging the shift she had already seen in him, the understanding settling in like a quiet reassurance. "Exactly," she replied, her voice calm, but the clarity in it undeniable. "And that starts with how we approach every situation, with how we see the people we serve. We have to stop looking at situations through the lens of authority first. We have to see the person in front of us, not as a problem to be solved, but as someone who deserves respect, regardless of the circumstances." Travis looked down at the table for a moment, his fingers lightly tapping the surface as if working through her words, considering them deeply. He didn't speak immediately, but when he did, his voice was quieter, more measured. "I've been doing this job for a long time," he said slowly, his gaze still fixed on the table. "And sometimes it's easy to forget that the badge doesn't give you the right to decide who deserves respect and who doesn't. I've made those assumptions." Naomi could see the weight of the admission in his posture, the way he wasn't trying to excuse it, but simply acknowledging the reality of it. "I've seen it too," Naomi said quietly, her voice steady. "And that's what we change. Not just the way we do the job, but the way we see it, the way we see each other." There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again, his voice carrying a new level of understanding. "How do we start?" he asked, his gaze meeting Naomi's, no longer distant, but engaged, ready. Naomi smiled slightly, the expression not soft, but not hard either, just a recognition of the moment. "We start with the next call," she said. "We start by making sure we don't assume. We start by making sure that when we engage with someone, we do it with respect first, no matter what." Travis and Ethan nodded in unison, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them, a silent agreement that the change was no longer theoretical, it was real, it was happening now. Naomi stood up then, the room around her settling into a new rhythm, one that had not yet fully formed but was already taking shape. "I'll be checking in regularly," she said, turning toward the door. And we'll keep holding ourselves accountable. Together. As she left the room, she could feel the weight of the moment behind her, the quiet shift that had occurred, not just within the precinct, but within the people who worked there. The process of change was never quick, never easy, but it had started, and that was what mattered most. Naomi walked through the hallway with purpose, her footsteps steady, no longer carrying the uncertainty that had been there before, but something else, something stronger. The work wasn't finished. It had only just begun. The days that followed carried a quiet sense of urgency, not because anyone was pushing for change, but because it had already begun. Naomi Carter didn't need to make grand speeches or gestures. The difference was in the details, the way she moved through the precinct, the way she interacted with the officers, the way she held herself, steady, grounded, present. She had a presence that didn't require loud authority. It was the kind of leadership that settled into the room and spread without fanfare, the kind that demanded attention without asking for it. As the days turned into weeks, small shifts began to appear. Travis Doyle, once certain of his ways, now questioned his approach more openly. He found himself pausing before reacting, considering his words more carefully, checking his assumptions before they could take root. Ethan Brooks, more reserved by nature, had begun to speak up more. In meetings, offering suggestions and ideas, no longer content to follow without questioning. The other officers, too, began to change in subtle ways. Their conversations shifted. What had once been casual complaints or dismissive remarks became thoughtful exchanges, more focused on the work than on the process. They still made mistakes, of course. They were human, and mistakes were inevitable. But now, when they happened, they took responsibility for them. They didn't rush to explain them away or place the blame elsewhere. They simply acknowledged the error and learned from it. One afternoon, Naomi found herself in the break room, a rare moment of quiet in a day filled with meetings and reports. She stood by the coffee machine, waiting for her cup to fill, her thoughts momentarily drifting from the weight of the day's responsibilities. The door opened behind her, and she turned to see Travis standing in the doorway, his usual confident stride replaced by something softer, more thoughtful. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice calm, but with a hint of something else, something less certain. Naomi nodded, gesturing to the seat across from her at the small table. "Of course." Travis walked over, his hands resting lightly on the back of the chair as he stood there for a moment, considering. He finally sat down, exhaling slowly, the weight of whatever was on his mind clearly settling in. Naomi didn't rush him, simply waited in silence, giving him the space to speak when he was ready. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice quieter now, more reflective than it had been in their previous conversations, "about the way we've been doing things here, about the assumptions we've made." Naomi kept her gaze steady, her posture open, not leading, just allowing him to continue at his own pace. "I never realized how much of what we did was based on those assumptions. How often we just moved without questioning why." He shifted in his seat slightly, his hands now resting on the table, palms down. "I've been doing this job for a long time, and I thought I knew what worked. I thought I knew how to handle situations. But after everything that's happened, after the last few weeks, I'm starting to realize that maybe I was wrong." Naomi remained silent for a moment, considering his words. It wasn't the first time someone had come to her with a similar realization, but it was always significant when it happened. "It's a big shift," she said finally, her voice steady, but understanding. "But it's a necessary one. You can't lead if you're not willing to question what you're doing." Travis nodded, the admission not easy but genuine. "I don't know if I'm fully there yet," he said, "but I'm trying. I want to be better." Naomi smiled slightly, not in a way that suggested triumph, but in recognition of the moment. "That's all anyone can do," she replied. "We're all still learning. Every day." Travis let out a small breath, the tension he'd been holding easing just a little. "I've been thinking about the way I've approached people too," he said, his gaze steady now. "I've always been about the rules, the procedures. I never really considered how it might feel from the other side. I didn't think about what kind of impact I was having." Naomi nodded again, her expression softening slightly. "It's not easy to change your mindset, especially when you've been operating one way for so long. But you're doing it, and that's the important part." Travis gave a small nod, sitting back in his chair slightly, looking more at ease than he had in a while. "I'll keep trying," he said quietly. And I'll keep listening. Naomi stood up then, the small break from her routine grounding her for the work ahead. That's the key, she said, her tone calm but firm. Listening. To each other. To the people we serve. To ourselves. She paused at the door, then turned back to him. We all have a role in making this better. It's not just about one person or one change. It's about all of us, together. Travis gave her a small, thoughtful nod, the weight of the conversation settling in but no longer feeling like a burden. He stood up as well, meeting her gaze. Thanks, he said simply, the gratitude in his voice genuine, not forced. Naomi smiled slightly, then turned and walked out of the break room, the quiet of the day around her still carrying the energy of the shifts that were taking place. It wasn't perfect yet, and it wouldn't be for a long time, but it was real. The change was happening, and it was happening in ways that were small, quiet, and undeniable. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like the right kind of change.